Hello everyone, you are on the channel The Middle Ages. Today we're embarking on a thrilling journey back in time to explore the legendary weapons that shaped battles and defined an era. From the clang of swords to the whistle of arrows, medieval warfare was a brutal but fascinating symphony of steel and strategy. Forget what you think you know from movies and video games. We're going to dive deep into the real history, the mechanics, and the surprising truths behind the most iconic weapons of the Middle Ages. So grab your virtual helmet, and let's march onto the historical battlefield. First up, the undisputed king of medieval combat, the sword. But the sword is a huge category. In the early Middle Ages, you'd see the Viking sword, a straight, double-edged blade designed for powerful cuts, often wielded with a shield. As armor evolved, so did the sword. Enter the arming sword, a one-handed cruciform-hilted weapon that was the trusty sidearm of many a knight. It was versatile, good for both cutting and thrusting. But what happens when plate armor becomes common? A simple cut won't do the trick. This is where the longsword truly shines. This two-handed weapon offered more leverage and power. Knights trained for years in sophisticated fencing systems to use the longsword not just for hacking, but for precise thrusts into the gaps of an opponent's armor, the armpits, the groin, the visor. They even used techniques like the murder stroke, where they'd grip the blade itself and use the hilt and crossguard to bludgeon their foe like a mace. It was a surprisingly technical and elegant weapon, far from the clumsy hacking often depicted. And let's not forget specialized swords like the falchion, a single-edged, cleaver-like blade that delivered devastating cuts. Of course, a battlefield wasn't just a collection of duels. It was about formations and breaking those formations. And for that, you need reach. This brings us to the age of polearms. The humble spear is perhaps the oldest and most common weapon in human history, and it remained a staple for peasant levies and professional soldiers alike. It was cheap to make, easy to use in a phalanx, and effective at keeping enemies, especially cavalry, at a distance. But medieval innovation didn't stop there. The spear evolved into a whole family of terrifying weapons. The halberd, a Swiss invention, was a game changer. It combined three weapons in one: an axe blade for chopping, a spear point for thrusting, and a hook on the back for pulling knights off their horses. It was the multi-tool of medieval warfare, and a disciplined block of halberdiers could stop a cavalry charge dead in its tracks. Then you have the billhook, which evolved from a farmer's tool, and the pike, an incredibly long spear, sometimes up to 18 feet, used in dense formations to create an impenetrable wall of pointy death. These weapons, not the sword, were the true deciders of many large-scale battles. Now let's talk about blunt force trauma. When your enemy is encased in steel, sometimes a sharp edge isn't the best tool for the job. You need something that can crush, dent, and concuss. Enter the mace, the warhammer, and the flail. A mace is essentially a club, often with flanges or knobs on the head to concentrate the force of the blow. Even if it didn't break through the armor, the sheer kinetic energy could break bones and cause severe internal injuries. The warhammer was even more specialized. It often had a hammer face on one side and a sharp spike or beak on the other. The hammer side was for crushing, and the spike was perfect for puncturing helmets or finding weak points in plate. It was a brutal armor can opener of a weapon. And then there's the flail, a weapon that has been heavily romanticized. The military flail, a ball and chain on a stick, was likely much rarer on the battlefield than popular culture suggests. It was difficult to control, and you were just as likely to hit yourself or an ally as the enemy. The more common version was the peasant flail, a farming tool for threshing grain, which could be used as an improvised weapon in a pinch. While fearsome-looking, its practical application in organized military formations is highly debated by historians. So far, we've focused on close-quarters combat. But what about dominating the battlefield from a distance? That's where missile weapons come in. The most iconic is, without a doubt, the English longbow. In the hands of a trained yeoman, this was a weapon of mass destruction. Made from a single piece of yew wood and standing as tall as a man, the longbow had an incredible rate of fire. A skilled archer could loose 10 to 12 arrows a minute. These arrows could blot out the sun, raining down on enemy formations, causing chaos, injuring horses, and finding gaps in armor. Battles like Crécy and Agincourt proved the longbow's devastating effectiveness against a numerically superior, heavily armored French army. But the longbow required immense strength and years of constant practice to master. Across the continent, another ranged weapon was gaining popularity: the crossbow. The crossbow was mechanically more complex, but it had several key advantages. It was much easier to learn to use. A recruit could be trained to be an effective crossbowman in weeks, not years. It also held its power without requiring the user to strain. A crossbowman could load his weapon, take cover, and wait for the perfect moment to shoot. While its rate of fire was much slower than a longbow's, its bolts packed a tremendous punch, capable of piercing even heavy mail and some plate armor at close range. It was considered so ungentlemanly that the church even tried to ban its use against fellow Christians at one point, though this was largely ignored. And we can't talk about medieval weapons without mentioning the big guns: siege engines. Taking a castle or a fortified city was a monumental task, and you needed specialized equipment to do it. The trebuchet was the apex predator of medieval siege warfare. Unlike the earlier torsion-powered catapults, the trebuchet used a massive counterweight to swing a long arm, hurling projectiles weighing hundreds of pounds over incredible distances. They could throw massive stones to smash walls. But they were also used for psychological warfare, launching diseased animal carcasses, or even captured messengers over the castle walls to spread fear and sickness. Setting up and aiming a trebuchet was a complex feat of engineering and physics, a far cry from the brutish image of medieval technology. Alongside trebuchets, you had battering rams to smash gates, siege towers to get your soldiers over the walls, and sappers who would dig tunnels to undermine the foundations of the defenses. As the Middle Ages drew to a close, a new sound began to echo across the battlefield: the roar of gunpowder. Early firearms like the hand cannon were crude, inaccurate, and often as dangerous to the user as to the enemy. But they were loud, terrifying, and their potential was undeniable. They didn't require the strength of a longbowman or the armor of a knight. As technology improved, leading to the arquebus and then the musket, the age of knights in shining armor began to fade. The cannon made castle walls obsolete, and the firearm made plate armor a liability. The entire structure of medieval warfare, built around the knight, the castle, and the sword, was brought to an end not by a better blade, but by a simple chemical reaction. So from the personal duel of the sword to the formation-breaking power of the polearm, from the arrow storms of the longbow to the wall-shattering might of the trebuchet, the weapons of the Middle Ages were incredibly diverse and sophisticated. They were products of their time, constantly evolving to counter new defenses and strategies. Understanding these weapons gives us a deeper appreciation for the skill, brutality, and ingenuity of the medieval warrior. What's your favorite medieval weapon? Is there one you think is underrated or misunderstood? Let us know in the comments below. We love reading your thoughts and starting a conversation with this amazing community. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the armories of history. If you enjoyed this video and want to learn more about the fascinating world of the Middle Ages, be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure. Until next time, stay curious.